All right, this is an advanced level topic. The topic is rich world, poor world. So the question to start with is what kind of aid should governments of rich countries give to poor countries, if any? So this could be a complicated question, I think. I think that, first of all, that rich countries of the world should give to poor countries. I think we have a responsibility to care for people who have a need, who are maybe suffering, don't have food, don't have clean water to drink, maybe don't have a place to live or shelter, especially in the case of a disaster like a hurricane or earthquake or something like that. But the question is, what kind of aid should we give to countries as rich countries? So there could be different ways to handle situations that come up. First of all, if we give money, that could be helpful because then they can choose to buy or purchase the things that are necessary for them. It's maybe easier logistically. Logistics is like how things work, like how you maybe in this case, I'm talking about transporting uh, material things to them, like food or materials for building or things like that. So the logistics of transporting that stuff can be expensive, could be complicated depending on their situation and where they're located. So in some instances, it might be better to give money because then they can source those things locally. So that means they can find it there. It's a local source. It means something that's there that they can get what they need from that place. So, for example, if they have places where they can purchase food locally or regionally, maybe that's a better idea than taking food from a place like America or someplace in Europe and transporting that there because of the amount of time it takes, the energy and effort that it takes to get it there. So that's a possibility. The concern I think about money of giving that would be that maybe there's corruption. So instead of using the money to purchase things that are needed, they use the money to make themselves wealthy. We'd be talking about officials or people who have access to the money. And typically, when there's a lot of corruption, there's levels of corruption. So everyone will take their piece of the pie, we would say, their little bit of the money. So by the time it actually gets down to the people who need it, there's not enough left to buy them the food they need or the medicine they need or things like that. So that becomes complicated. So since I mentioned medicine, sometimes countries need medicine because of sickness. We see the COVID-19 right now, the coronavirus. So if there was a possibility that there was a medicine, I know advanced countries are working on those things. Hungary's working on it, finding vaccines and cures for these kinds of things. The United States is, I think most modern countries are working on it. China is working on it as well. So providing medicine in a case like that is very important. If a country has access to medicine and can provide that to people, then I think they have a responsibility to do that. Especially looking at things like malaria. That's a big issue in the tropical countries, African countries, Asian, South American countries. And millions of people die from that every year. It's a very, very big issue. And it's important to get the medicine to people who need it, to find a way to do that. It doesn't always have to be free, but it should be affordable for the people, I think. Machinery, equipment, this is another important one. If we're talking about clean water or being able to grow their own food, it's important to get them what they need to do that. So I know organizations who are, for example, building wells or digging wells in Africa. So they'll go into a village and dig a well for them. They raise money. Many of them are nonprofit organizations. Some of them are governmental organizations. Some of them are private organizations. So they will go and dig a well for the people so that they don't have to carry buckets to the river so that they can have clean water, because often disease is caused by drinking water from rivers because they're polluted. They're polluted because the water is unfiltered, because of the heat, because they don't have good systems for waste. So, for example, sewage, if you know what sewage is. So it would be like where your pipes go from your house. In some places, those pipes go right into the river, if you have pipes. So it's very unhealthy or even dangerous to drink water from the river. So it's good to be able to dig a well. And so that's a way that you can aid them. That could be categorized as food or equipment or machinery. Another thing is sometimes they need help with their farming. Maybe machinery could aid them in producing more crops. Maybe they could learn how to use the machinery. Sometimes those can be difficult situations in third world. If I bring them a tractor, am I also giving them parts and mechanics and everything that they need to keep the tractor running? Because you can create dependency. People can become dependent on you because you're their source, right? You have to keep giving them, parts or new tractors or things like that. Otherwise, they go back to where they were before, digging by hand with tools, or maybe with an animal or something like that slows them down. So there's so many factors involved, I guess, when you're thinking about providing equipment for countries in the third world. But given the right circumstance, if you can build the structure for it, where they know how to repair those things, they have parts for them, if it can be built up to where that system works, then I think it's a very good thing. Hospitals, of course, are important as well, to build hospitals for them. A place where they can go when they're sick, a place that can provide them with medicine and surgeries and people to diagnose, to figure out what their problem is. So they can diagnose a sickness, tell them what's wrong with them, and help them. So those things are important. Some places don't have access to hospitals, so it's important for them to be able to have a place they can go like that. Schools also are important. If you want to raise them out of poverty, school is probably one of the top things. If they can go to school, if they can afford to go to school, or if they have access to school, because with an education comes opportunity to have a better job, a better paying job, an opportunity to go to university, an opportunity to maybe even travel, to learn things that they couldn't learn if they stayed in their setting. So that's very important. So with schools comes a need to build school buildings, a need to train teachers, things like that, which all requires money and resources. And that brings us to the last one, training. So school is a very important part of training. You can also have vocational training. We talked about tractors or equipment. Teaching them how to fix stuff is very important. If you're going to give them something like that, they need to know how to work with it and to fix it when it needs to be fixed. So those are all important things. Next question. Do you think citizens should be encouraged to do voluntary service overseas so as to understand the problems of poorer countries? Yeah, I'm not sure that I think it's necessary to do voluntary service overseas to understand the problems. But if you want to do voluntary service overseas to help solve the problems, then I think that's important. I think today you can learn about the problems through media, through study, through education, different forms. I don't think it's necessary to travel there. Sometimes people who travel to places like that, they actually can create a burden for the people who are there helping, because somebody then has to pick you up from the airport, provide you with housing, transportation, food, all of these things. So just to go there to see the problems firsthand, I don't think is that great of an idea. But if you could go there to help, if you could go there to volunteer, to spend a year, 2 years, where you're actually involved in solving the problem, then I think it should be encouraged. And there's all kinds of different opportunities for that. I know Hungary has organizations as well who are doing those sorts of things. So I think it is important to do those things, but to have the right motivation, to not to do it in a way that I'm not becoming a burden, I guess. But I'm really, truly being helpful. I think that's the most important part of it. And then with that exposure, because you're there, so you do get exposure and learn firsthand about the problems. And then you come back with that understanding, and you can encourage others to help where they can. Or even I think it can create within a culture a better sense of perspective or gratitude for what you have. For example, when I've been to some countries that are very, very poor, and it gives you a different perspective, because the poorest people in my home country, America, the poorest people there are rich often compared to poor people in other countries, because of the structure that's there to support them, government money that they receive, housing that they receive, things that are given to them, opportunities that they have for education. It's not comparable, the poor of some countries in the world compared to some of our Western countries, where we don't even realize, I think sometimes, I know Americans don't, they don't realize how wealthy they are. They don't realize all of the resources that they have. And sometimes what that does is it creates a sense of entitlement, and it creates a sense of ingratitude, not being grateful for the things that you have or the things that you're given. So I think being educated in that can be really important, to give perspective to people. And it also helps us, because I've heard people in America, and maybe this happens in Hungary too, they will say things like, well, we have poor people here, so why are we giving money to these countries? For their poor people, we should take care of our people first. And there's an element of truth to that, right? But it's really not comparable. So if you have an interest in learning about those things, there's lots of resources. You could Google it and find out, without even going there, what the situations are like often. But it's different when you go there and you see people suffering and dying from things that maybe diseases that we've cured in the West, that we don't even have. For example, malaria used to be in the United States, in the state of Florida and some of the southern states, but it's not even there anymore. It's been eradicated. So that means it's basically been wiped out. It's not there anymore. But people are dying from that in other countries. I saw people suffering from that in my travels. I was there when people had funerals. I got sick with malaria myself, so I experienced what it was like. And I was thankful to have access to Western doctors and Western medicine. It took me still about 8 weeks to recover from it before I could go back to work, because it just wiped me out. I had no energy, no strength. After I wasn't feeling sick anymore, my body was weak. So that's very bad for somebody. Like, I was in good shape, I was young, I was healthy. But for somebody who's already sick, maybe they don't have food, maybe they're young or they're old, because that's many diseases take out the very young and the very old because they're weak. And so so I think it's important to get a perspective on those kinds of things. All right, I'll get off that topic. On to the next question here.